I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am delighted to have secured today's important adjournment debate on access to banking services and banking hubs in Devon. Take a quick stroll down your nearest high street. You will notice there are far fewer bank branches than there were in the years gone by. Far fewer. In 1992, there were 19,000 bank and building society branches in the UK. In 2022, the number of bank and building society branches had fallen to 8,000, from 19,000 to 8,000. But this decline hasn't happened quicker on any particular government's watch. The fall has been consistent and steady over the last 30 years, but we have reached a tipping point. Bank branches are getting scarce. We notice when bank branches are gone altogether from our high streets. People cannot deposit cash or pay in cheques. Businesses and charities cannot pop to the branch to refill their tills or bank their takings at the end of the day. And we no longer have friendly faces to talk to for financial advice. When bank branches are gone, people then have to travel miles to apply for a loan and travel miles to arrange a third-party access to start, for example, bereavement proceedings. And when they're gone, people tell me that managing their money becomes more difficult, if not impossible. People in my constituency travel to cities and towns like Exeter or Honiton for their nearest branch. Every time a bank decides to shut its high street branch, my postbag fills up. I share their frustration. I get it. I will give way.
Can I commend him for bringing this forward, a massive issue? Does the honourable member not agree that the abdication of responsibility by the banks to rural communities, who often have the worst rural transport, the worst infrastructure and the worst broadband connection, cannot be paved over with a user's guide to online banking? And at the very least, a hub that is accessible through the day and the evening must be the minimum standard of service required by any national bank for their customers.
Absolutely right. I know that I personally would benefit from a how-to online bank guide, because ultimately it can be quite confusing, even for someone who's relatively technical. So I thank him for his point. It is not enough to say bank branches closures are commercial decisions. Yes, the government cannot intervene, and yes, I cannot stop bank branches closing as an MP, as much as I try. But we have, as I say, reached a tipping point where enough is enough. Banks must provide core services to loyal customers on our high streets. They must stop washing their hands of their customers' needs. The banks claim their branches on our high streets are increasingly outdated. More customers are moving online and going cashless, so they say. That is broadly true, but it is not an excuse to pull up sticks and simply disappear. In fact, I believe bank branch closures across the UK are forcing people to change their habits. People still need access to cash and face-to-face banking services. The demand is definitely still there. Let me just go through a couple of statistics. 27% of over 65s and 58% of over 85s rely on face-to-face banking. Some of the old generation are not technophobes. In fact, they may have valid reasons for not wanting to do online banking. Fear of being defrauded, a lack of IT skills, are common reasons as to why face-to-face is preferred by many. And that's according to research from Age UK. If the need for face-to-face banking is still there, what is the solution? That brings me to the second part of my debate, and I give way.
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. As somebody who has a banking hub in Belper, it has become a lifeline for businesses in the high street because they can get access to cash and pay cash in, particularly small businesses. And I would encourage the honourable gentleman to keep campaigning for a banking hub because it really helps every sector of society, older, younger and businesses. And for me, it has rejuvenated the high street in Belper.
I thank the honourable lady. It's almost as if she knew what I was about to say. I was about to move on to banking hubs. They are a relatively new concept. And I think about them as shared banking spaces. They look a bit like a traditional bank branch, but unlike a traditional bank branch, the hubs are available to everyone. They offer counter services. Customers from any bank can withdraw and deposit cash, collect change, deposit cheques, pay bills, make balance inquiries. And they also offer private spaces for specific banks. Customers can speak to someone from their own bank or building society about more complex issues such as mortgages, loans and pensions, something you don't really want to do online. They are industry-led and a solution to the demise of physical branches, but the government has been clear the delivery of hubs must speed up. The government has done important work to legislate to protect access to cash, not least through the Financial Services and Markets Act 2023. And I certainly look forward to hearing the Minister's remarks in this debate. I hope to hear about the progress to roll out more banking hubs across the country. I know the Minister has had discussions with UK high street banks and has also held round tables with the industry and MPs about banking hubs. And as East Devon's MP, I've been holding meetings locally to see how we can set up banking hubs in East Devon. Last year, I launched a local campaign. Lloyds in Sidmouth was going to shut its doors as the last bank in town. It's where I live, and local residents and I wanted to send a clear message to the banks they should staff a banking hub in Sidmouth. The hundreds of people who got in touch from my survey were quite startling. 81% of residents who responded said they'd visited a bank branch in the past 6 months. 96% said they wanted staff from their own bank in the hub. In my survey, on the question, what is the most common way you access banking services, 46% said in branch or in person, 52% said online, only 2% said telephone. My survey showed a clear demand for face-to-face banking and the need for a banking hub in Sidmouth. Now here's what some local residents told me when Lloyds announced it was closing its branch in Sidmouth. Mary said, "We wonder why it's Sidmouth. With all the holiday crowds, folk festivals, regatta, jazz festivals, the last bank is set to close. There seems to be no logic. Do these decision makers have a rusty old pin they use to decide which bank stays and which bank goes?" Susan told me, "I am very upset to discover Lloyds is closing. I wonder what customers are supposed to do when they need to discuss paperwork or for the power of attorney or closure of accounts after a death." Pauline told me, "I very nearly got scammed. I am not technologically minded and do not bank online. I received a very convincing text message which resulted in my going to my bank to make a payment. If it wasn't for the lady I spoke to in the bank, I would have had my account wiped clean." She was very much on the ball. I was saved. This shows the importance of having a bank in Sidmouth. And local residents like Mary, Susan and Pauline were delighted when Sidmouth's banking hub opened its doors last month. It's been very popular, but is it perfect? No. I'd like to pay tribute to the staff though, they are fantastic. It's not yet quite what the town needs, because it needs a cash point. It needs to have a 24/7 available ATM outside. So a printer too, residents can get mini statements from that, and a trial of Saturday opening hours if at all possible. But I want to thank the team at Cash Access UK and building contractors for getting the hub up and running so successfully before Lloyds closed its doors. I was also pleased to visit Axminster's banking hub when it opened. I heard feedback from local residents and businesses about how important it is for that town. More banking hubs like the one in Sidmouth and Axminster are needed in Devon. I want to put that firmly on the record in today's debate. And I'm currently working with local communities to try and get banking hubs in towns including Exmouth, Budleigh Salterton and Ottery St Mary. Exmouth, the largest town in Devon, will need a banking hub sooner rather than later. I've already made the case for one. Halifax's branch in the town will close this summer. That will leave just 3 banks remaining in Exmouth. The case for a banking hub in Budleigh Salterton is also strong too. Budleigh has been without a high street bank due to closures in recent years. The last bank in town, Lloyds, closed in January 2019. The town's population is significantly older than the national average. Local residents and businesses have only the post office and the co-op to access over-the-counter banking services. I've seen the queues, it's not great. It's a small shop, but they work incredibly hard. That is why I've made a formal request for a banking hub alongside local councillor Henry Riddle. Now, I know the government wants the delivery of banking hubs to be sped up, and I hope that Exmouth, Budleigh and Ottery will be in line for banking hubs too. I would cite as examples as to where the problem lies. I believe the criteria for whether an area should get a banking hub must be relaxed. It's far too high at the moment. Generally, for a banking hub, you need 7,000 people within a 1 kilometre of the centre of town and at least 70 retailers. You also need there to be no banks at all. In other words, the last bank in town must be closing or it's already closed. Too often, it takes the last bank in town to shut before the industry gets its act together and opens a banking hub. On this point, Exmouth won't get a banking hub under the current criteria until 2028. Nationwide told me when I visited last week that they will keep their Roll Street branch open until at least 2028. And of course, I welcome that commitment by Nationwide, who are playing fair by the high streets. But that commitment effectively means a banking hub won't open in Exmouth while the branch remains. And that makes no sense to me. We've got to consider the size of Exmouth. We've also got to consider the number of banks the town used to have. We do need to look again at the criteria, lower the bar. Recently, I co-signed a letter from the member for Hertford and Stortford to the FCA to unlock more banking hubs. The FCA will decide on new rules in the third quarter of this year. I'll be watching that like a hawk. This could be an important turning point, so even more banking hubs can open. As I said, more banking hubs, like the one in Sidmouth and Axminster, are badly needed in my part of Devon. People should be able to access banking services on our high streets. I'm delighted to have secured today's debate. I look forward to hearing the Minister's remarks.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's an absolute pleasure to respond to this debate today. And of course, in particular, give thanks to the member for East Devon for securing this debate. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we know our colleagues in this place. They all work hard for their constituents, but some they go the extra mile. And I would say that the member for East Devon, on this subject, like so many others, is an exemplar of what we can see in British politics and in this Parliament. His work on securing access to banking services in his constituency is second to none. Now, I appreciate the strength of feeling across the chamber on this topic. I share many members' concerns on this in light of the over 600 closure announcements that we've seen in the last year. Banks and building societies are essential to enable people to manage their money on a day-to-day basis, and they hold a privileged and important place in our society. As such, firms must ensure that all customers, wherever they live, have appropriate access to banking and cash services. Now, we need to be grown up about this, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We all recognise, as indeed the Honourable Gentleman made clear in his remarks, that the world of banking has changed greatly in recent years. Reflecting this shift, customers are also increasingly moving towards online and mobile access. And this shift is apparent across many areas of the economy and society, not just banking. Recent FCA data shows that only 21% of British adults still regularly use a bank branch. In contrast, almost 9 in 10 adults banked online or used a mobile app. Now, it is right that firms continue to innovate in response to changed customer habits and ensure that customers across the UK benefit from the latest developments in technology. But these developments in technology, and this is a very fundamental point, which I believe my honourable friend will share my views on this. These changes in technology does not mean that access to in-person banking and cash services are no longer required. It remains vitally important to many people up and down the country in our constituencies. In times of need, or when more personalised support and services are required, such as the examples that my honourable friend mentioned in his speech, speaking to a real person face-to-face can be essential. And, more broadly, the wider societal benefits to our constituencies and indeed to our high streets and our market towns of bank branches are critically important as well. Now, in light of this, the government has taken decisive action over recent years to ensure that access to cash is protected through the Financial Services and Markets Act 2023. Now, this Act places a responsibility on the FCA to seek to ensure reasonable provision to cash withdrawal and deposit facilities, including free services in relation to personal current accounts. Following this, the government published a policy statement setting out its policies on access to cash. The FCA must have regard to this policy statement as part of its regulatory approach. This statement set out that people and businesses should be no further than 3 miles away from a free cash access point. As my honourable friend mentioned, the FCA has recently held a consultation on its proposed regulatory regime in this area. Under the proposals, banks and building societies that are designated by the government will be required to assess and fill gaps if required, or indeed fill potential gaps in cash access provision that significantly impacts consumers and businesses. Now, as well as access to cash, the FCA has guidance on bank branch closures. While decisions on individual closures are rightly a commercial issue for firms, you don't want government ministers deciding where bank branches go. Tempted and fascinated I would be by that process. But we expect firms to adhere to the FCA's guidance. This guidance is very clear. Banks and building societies must ensure that they carefully consider the impact of planned closures on their customers. Now, where firms fall short of those expectations, the FCA has the power to and will ask for closures to be paused or other options be put in place. Now, the industry has made great strides, and it's important to make this point, to provide a whole range of initiatives through alternatives such as agreements with the post office or community outreach programs in locations such as community centres and libraries and village halls. Shared banking hubs, however, as we have heard, are another exciting and popular innovation here. Banking hubs are a clear example of pioneering industry-led innovation to protect access in a changing landscape. As the Honourable Lady for Mid Derbyshire made clear, and I hope I quote her correctly, in many instances, banking hubs can be a lifeline to communities. I am very pleased that the Sidmouth Hub has recently opened, where my honourable friend had the privilege of cutting the ribbon, or whatever they had him cut to open it. But it's really, really important that the House, and indeed everybody knows, that banking hubs can be a modern 21st century way to ensure access to cash and banking services, and the government strongly supports this innovation. These hubs help people and businesses withdraw and deposit cash, pay in cheques, check their balance through the post office counter. They also provide a community banker who can help people with wider banking services, from making a transfer to providing support to fraud and scam victims. Indeed, my honourable friend mentioned victims in his own constituency who he's been working with. Now, hubs are deployed by Cash Access UK in response to a link assessment of the community's cash needs. And to ensure that there is no gap in the provision of services, industry has committed that if a hub is recommended, they will not close the branch that it replaces for up to 12 months until that hub is open. If there's a delay beyond that, a temporary hub will be put in place. To date, over 120 hubs have been announced across the country and 47 are open. This is a very welcome programme, and it's a priority to me that the industry continues to deliver on this, but speeds it up. UK Finance, the trade body representing the industry, has recently committed to a total of 225 hubs to be opened in the next 18 months. And like my honourable friend, and many in this House, I'll be watching them and holding them to account and making sure that these hubs open as quickly as possible.
Will the Minister give way?
Of course.
As the Minister knows, I represent Derbyshire Dales, and we've recently had the closure of the last bank, the National Westminster Bank in Bakewell. That's the last bank in the whole of the Peak District. The concern I have is the present criteria for hubs excludes us because Bakewell is too small. Bakewell is only 3,000 to 4,000 people, and the present criteria, it has to be 7,000. So what might work in Belper or another part of a district or a county like Derbyshire or indeed in Devon, it's going to leave people left behind. So is the government going to be looking into further with the FCA whether the criteria should be changed to take into account areas that surround a smaller town, but that smaller town may still be vibrant, but just not big enough on its own to qualify for a hub? What's the future in this area?
I thank my honourable friend from Derbyshire Dales for her point, and I shouldn't have left her out when I was talking about the committed members of Parliament who work on this area. I can pay testimony to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for how many times my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady for Derbyshire Dales, has questioned me, badgered me, advocated for her community, advocated for her constituents on this area, and today is another very good example. And in relation to her points specifically, if she just waits a few minutes in my remarks, I will address them very directly indeed. Now, it is important that hubs provide a good service to customers, and the industry evolves its offer as it learns from the rollout of the 47 hubs that are already open. Following recent discussions I've held with the UK High Street banks and my roundtable with industry representatives and MPs last month, I'm pleased that industry have agreed to improve the services in hubs to ensure that they are a genuine alternative to bank branches. And indeed, my honourable friend, the member for East Devon, did refer to some improvements that he'd like to see in his own constituency. Participating high street banks have committed to a range of improvements to the banking services provided in hubs, such as, first, an agreed, consistent and improved level of service provided by all firms. Secondly, ensuring that personal customers do not need to bring their own devices in order to access certain services. Thirdly, trailing various new services such as a customer liaison service and Saturday openings. These are some of the improvements that I think will make a big difference to the participation and indeed how welcome banking hubs are. And I'm grateful for the constructive and positive approach I've seen from industry in their engagement with His Majesty's Treasury, recognising the needs of their customers. And I've written to all MPs and Chair of the Treasury Select Committee in the House on this package. Now, I will address the Honourable Lady for Derbyshire Dales' point at this moment, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Firms have also provided me with reassurance that they will continue to revisit the criteria for locations to be eligible for a hub to ensure that they reflect customer needs, and will do so particularly following the publication of the FCA's response to its recent access to cash consultation. This is very important because rural areas and indeed smaller places like Bakewell can sometimes lose out. And I know that the industry will be watching this debate and will take what I'm saying here seriously. Let's revisit the criteria in a sensible way to make sure that it takes into account some areas that need banking hub service that the criteria does not currently accommodate. And I think that that's very, very important, and I'll be working with the industry to see what it can do to deliver on what I have just said from this dispatch box. I believe the measures set out in this package mark a significant step forward from industry in ensuring that customer needs are being met. But I'd like to reassure you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I'll continue to closely monitor the rollout of banking hubs. Now, I'm very grateful in closing that we've had another chance to discuss this very important topic today. Whilst branch closures are indeed a commercial decision, and it's right that they're a commercial decision, I strongly believe that all customers, wherever they live, whatever their age, should have appropriate access to banking and cash services, appropriate access for them. And I'm grateful for the engagement that I've had from the sector and indeed the FCA on this important issue. I again thank the Honourable Member for East Devon for bringing his debate to the Chamber today, and particularly my honourable friends, the member for Mid Derbyshire and indeed the member for Derbyshire Dales as well. Derbyshire, there's a theme there, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for their contributions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.